In a small town in Japan, there is a primary school that closed its doors in 2006, not because of funding cuts, not because of scandal, because there were no children left to fill it. The building is still there. The desks are still there. The playground equipment rusted over slowly, season by season, until the local government quietly removed it. Nobody protested. There was nobody young enough to miss it. This is not a hypothetical. This is already happening in parts of the world, and it is about to happen everywhere. Imagine that starting today, every human being on Earth stops having children. Not by choice, not by law. The biological ability simply switches off. The last babies born are the ones already here. From this moment forward, the human race produces no new members. Most people's first instinct is to think about the distant future, the empty cities, the last generation, the silence at the end. But that is not where this story starts. It starts much sooner than you think, and it starts not with death, but with money. Year 1. Within 12 months, the global economy begins to restructure itself around a fact it has never had to face before. There are no new consumers coming. Every industry built on the assumption of future growth, housing, education, baby products, children's clothing, toys, formula, pediatric medicine, begins contracting simultaneously. Not slowly. The moment the news is confirmed, investors pull out. Markets reprice everything based on a future with a fixed and shrinking population. The baby product industry alone is worth over $300 billion globally. It does not wind down. It collapses. But here is what nobody predicted in year 1. The birth rate dropping to zero does not just affect industries built for children. It affects industries built on the expectation of children. Life insurance, pension funds, mortgage markets. All of them are mathematical models built on one core assumption, that there will always be more people behind you to sustain the system. Remove that assumption and the entire architecture of long-term financial planning has to be rebuilt from scratch. Economists call this a demographic dividend in reverse. Instead of a growing young population supporting an older one, you have a fixed population aging together with nobody coming up behind them to pay the bills. The schools feel it first at the administrative level. Enrollment projections that were already 5 years ahead suddenly become meaningless. Universities begin quietly reducing intake targets. Governments that have built entire social welfare systems on population growth models call emergency sessions. And in maternity wards around the world, midwives and obstetricians begin to realize their profession, one of the oldest in human history, has just become obsolete overnight. Year 5. By year 5, the change is visible in a way that data cannot fully capture. You can see it on the street. There are no prams. There are no small children running ahead of their parents in supermarkets. There are no school runs. The particular noise of a city with children in it sounds so constant and familiar that most adults never consciously registered it, is gone. Psychologists begin documenting something they call ambient grief, a population-wide low-level mourning not for any individual loss, but for the absence of something that was always there. The sound of playgrounds, the chaos of a family restaurant, the background noise of the next generation simply existing. The demographic researcher Sarah Harper at Oxford has spent decades studying population aging and describes the presence of children in a society as a psychological anchor and a visible reminder that time moves forward, that the species continues, that individual mortality is part of something larger. Remove that anchor, and something fundamental shifts in the collective human psyche. The oldest children in the world are now 5 years old. They are the last cohort, and they are already being treated differently, watched with a particular intensity by a species that has suddenly understood what it means for a generation to be the final one. Name a year 20. The oldest humans alive are now in their 20s. The youngest are 20. There is no one below that line. What this means in practical terms is that every system designed to train, educate, and integrate young people into society is now redundant. Universities are not just shrinking, they are closing. Apprenticeship programs have no apprentices. Entry-level job markets have collapsed entirely because there are no entry-level workers. The concept of a career ladder loses meaning when there is nobody climbing up behind you. The workforce is aging in real time with no replacement. In countries that were already facing demographic pressure, Japan, South Korea, Italy, Germany, the crisis arrives faster and harder. Entire industries that depend on physical labor and youth energy begin to fail not from lack of demand, but from lack of bodies able to do the work. Here is where it gets genuinely strange. The political consequences of a world where everyone is between 20 and 80 years old are almost impossible to predict. Democratic systems are built on a rotating population with a mix of ages, experiences, and priorities. A society with no young voters, no student movements, no generational conflict has never existed before. Political scientists who study this describe it as gerontocracy by default, not because old people seized power, but because there is nobody else. The linguist and cognitive scientist Steven Pinker has written extensively on how each generation reinvents language, culture, and ideas. Slang, music, art, fashion, humor, all of it has always been driven by the young. In year 20, culture begins to calcify, not because people stop being creative, but because the generational engine that has always driven cultural renewal has switched off. Year 50. The oldest humans alive are in their 50s. The youngest are 50. This is the year the scale of what is happening becomes impossible to ignore or manage. The global population, which was 8 billion at the moment children stopped being born, is now significantly smaller. Decades of natural mortality with zero replacement have taken their toll. Infrastructure built for billions begins to feel oversized. Cities designed for density start to hollow out from the edges inward. The same process that happened in that Japanese school is now happening to entire suburbs, then towns, then regions. But something unexpected is also happening. With a stable, aging, childless population consuming fewer resources and producing fewer emissions, certain environmental indicators are improving. Deforestation slows, carbon output drops. Wild animal populations in previously human-dominated regions begin to expand into the quiet edges of a shrinking human footprint. The planet, without being asked, is beginning to recover. Year 100. The last humans are old. The species is in its final decades. What they leave behind is the entire accumulated output of 300,000 years of human existence. Every book ever written, every piece of music ever recorded, every scientific discovery, every work of art, every building still standing. A civilization so vast and so complete that it will take something else entirely, if something else ever comes, millions of years to fully understand what was left here. The last generation does something no generation before them ever had to do. They make decisions not for their children, not for their grandchildren, but for no one. They build monuments to a species rather than a future. They write not to be read, but to have written. In that Japanese school, the desks are still there. They always were, and now, finally, everything else is too. This is not just a thought experiment about extinction. It is a question about what we are actually building when we build anything, whether the point was always the destination or whether it was the fact of the journey itself. You were born into a chain that stretched back 300,000 years without breaking once, until now.